All right, we're recording. Good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Brown. For those of you who don't know me, I've met several of you before, but I'm actually a project coach on the mobile web specialist track for the Grow with Google scholarships. So not officially part of FEND, but I do have a pretty broad background of different things. And most specifically, as it goes to what we're going to talk about today, I actually did Udacity's React Nano degree earlier this year, completed that right before the Grow with Google track started. And so the MyReads project comes from the React Nano degree, so it's actually something that I've been through before. And the MyReads project that's in FEND is actually just part one of what is, if I remember right, three progressively, more complicated projects related to all around MyReads. So what we're going to do today is go through just what we're doing for MyReads and FEND. And I shared a couple days ago on the Slack channels kind of how I break this project down into 5 major steps. Do this first, do this second. And I also have posted on my GitHub repo a new, my refined version of this project where it has all of those broken down into different branches. So you can actually, and as we go through this, I'll go from branch to branch so you can see the progression, and we'll talk about all of the different steps in there. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time diving into all of the specifics around the simpler parts, the syntax of React. There are a few things that people have been asking me on the Slack channels for help with. They all seem to come back to some similar themes, which quite honestly, nobody should feel bad about questions around these themes in React. They're the things that were tripping me up when I was first learning React. They trip everybody up when they're first learning React, and a lot of it has to do with the state management lifecycle. So we'll make sure that we spend a good amount of time focusing on that as we go through all of these branch commits. And then at the end, we'll make sure that there's time that we can do Q&A, do some live help stuff, make sure that we cover, things that people are feeling hung up on. So the first thing we want to do is this particular commit that we're looking at right now is, let me switch. This one I've called Stage 1 Object Layout. So if you look, what I've done here is I've taken the starter code that's provided for the MyReads project, which is, it's really great that they give us such good starter code. Visually, it's a nice layout. And if you look at the DOM, it's all very well structured as you would want a DOM to be. But it's just one big page and really just one big component, if you want to think of it that way. It's already running as a React piece, but it's not really doing much, and it's not broken down the way that you want it to. Philosophically speaking, I think of things in development, and what we're really talking about here is some really good object-oriented programming principles. And the way that I like to think of object-oriented programming is kind of like people. I manage people at work, or you work with people day to day to get tasks done, even in your own life. And the way to think about this kind of stuff is people. So I've got a task I want to get done, and it's going to involve 3 or 4 different people to get that done. I need to give a part of it to this person. They may need to share a part of what they're doing with another person who I'm also giving some other information to, and so on. And so the real question is, how do you break down this big thing that is MyReads into more discrete tasks so that each person or each object is doing one thing and doing it really well? They know how to do their part, and they know who to talk to if something needs done that isn't within their realm. So that's really how we're looking at breaking this down. So the way that I've chosen to break it down, and this isn't the only way it can be done, and I'm going to put that caveat on everything we talk about. This is just the way that I've chosen to break it down. I've taken what was the page that we're given in the starter code, and I've broken it down to everything that's in this components folder here. And so I start at the top level, which is we have a bookcase, and inside of that bookcase, we have multiple shelves, and each one of those is just an instance of a shelf. So I can have a shelf, and I can make that shelf as many times as I want to. And then each of those shelves is going to have one or more books on it. And each of those books is going to have the little changer button so that I can pull down and pick something if I want to. Oh, I see, I forgot to change. You're still seeing me, not the screen. Pardon me. I'm still getting used to using Zoom for this. Okay, there, better? Can see my code now, right? All right. So here's the components, as I was saying: bookcase, bookshelf, book, and the changer. And then I've also taken the search page and I've set it off to the side. We're not going to deal with the search page until the very, very end. So it's just going to kind of sit off to the side for right now. Once I've gotten these things broken out, the way that I did it is I started at the very high level and I took what was in all of the code that was in app.js and I carved it out and I said, okay, I'm going to make a bookcase component and I'm going to put all of that code that was in app.js in the render and I'm going to say, I've made a bookcase. And then all of that code is going to go into the bookcase. And you can see bookcase has all the basic stuff. I'm declaring state, which is empty, and I've got a render function. And I had everything in there. And so then once I had all of that in there, inside of that are the bookshelves. And I said, okay, I'm going to take all of the stuff for one of the bookshelves, because I only need one, because I'm just going to be duplicating it. And I'm going to make a bookshelf component. And I'll cut all of that stuff out of here. And so now my file just looks like this. So now it's just got bookshelf and all of the rest of the divs and styling that was on the original code. I even have the on click for showing the search page. It's not going to work anymore, but that's okay. And I'm going to make the bookshelf component. And so here it is. And then I have my one bookshelf and I took all of the books that were inside of it and I stripped it down. I'm just making one book. And I made a new component for book and I put all of the code for the book in here. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to make the shelf changer. And I made a component for the changer. And here's all the code for that. It's all the exact same code that was in our starter file. There's a bit less of it because I'm not duplicating books and duplicating shelves, but it's the exact same code that was there. I haven't changed anything other than to break it out into components and then use each of those components in my JSX. And then I've also got my search page over here, and I pulled that out and made it a page too, because it has to live somewhere. And then here's the index, and that's probably the last time we're going to look at the index for a while. So this is stage one. This is the very first thing that I would do were I approaching this project. And when I'm done and I run it, it looks like this. All I've got now is a single shelf. It's got a single book. I've got the bookcase. If I click on the search button, it doesn't, or the plus button doesn't do anything. And if I click on the shelf changer, you know, it still shows stuff, but it's not actually changing anything. Functionally, still doesn't do much. But my layout now is broken down into components that I'm going to be able to use to build everything out going forward. Okay, so let's change branches. And I need to remember what my branch names are. Pardon me. So next branch is we're going to connect the data. Okay. So connecting the data, we're going to start to put some of the code in. Not all the code, but just enough that we can actually see bookshelves and books. So here we're going to have a component did mount function. This is still from the original code. I just left it here. I hadn't gotten rid of it yet by the time I was doing this branch, but it's going to go away. I have a component did mount that's going to say, once I've loaded everything in, refresh all of the books in the display. The refresh all books is going to call the books API. It's going to get all of the books, and it's going to take that list, and it's going to do a set state by sorting all of the books. I've created a books utils here, and again, this is just a choice on my part. Books utils is an extra file where I'm doing a sort function, and I can use this in other places too, and actually I will eventually. So I'm sorting all of the books that I've been given and just basically sorting them alphabetically. and I'm setting this new book as false. This is something that'll get used later. So this is setting my state. Now this is important when we talk about state management. You might hear the term lifting up state used. And what that's really about is you want to make sure that you're maintaining your state and any functions that affect that state at the highest level in your application tree that it can affect things. So it's going to get a little clearer as we go on, but I just want to start with that. Make sure that you're putting things as high up in the tree as you would possibly need, because it's easier to cascade down than it is up. And that's where this comes in. Here you can see I've modified my bookcase. So I've got my books now, and I'm going to pass that on my props to the child object bookcase. So I'm saying I'm going to give you a value on the props named books. And the value of that is going to be the books that are now in my state. Because here I did a this.set state and I added books. And that's where I did the sort on this list that I got back from the API. And then I'm also going to pass down a function. I'm going to pass down something that I'm telling the child is called onRefreshAllBooks. That's what's being called for the child. But the reference here is just this refreshAllBooks function that I've declared at the app level. So if we look in the bookcase then, the bookcase is going to take that information and do something with it. Again, it's going to do a component did mount. It's going to look at this.props and call onRefreshAllBooks, which is the function at the app level that we just gave it. It's going to have an update shelves function. The update shelves are going to take all of the books in the list and from a bookcase perspective, break it down into shelves that I'm calling currently reading, want to read, and read. I'm giving it names. I'm saying which books go on here by filtering the list that I was given. So the original list with all of the books is still at the app level and it's still on the props. I'm not doing anything to mutate that list at all. What this is doing is creating new versions or new arrays that hold copies of the books that are in that other original list. Because whenever I do a filter, it creates a whole new array. It doesn't affect the original one. So now I've got 3 arrays here that the bookcase is holding on to, each with its own set of books. So now when I do the render, I'm first going to make sure that I've actually got books in the props. And as long as I do, so that's what this is a null check. And as long as that null check passes, then it's going to say how many do I have, how many books do I have. And as long as those things all pass, this is not null and this is more than 1, so I've got a book somewhere, then I'm going to update the shelves. I'm going to take the list, I'm going to update all of that stuff and get my shelves done. Now once I do that, I can go through and I can start rendering everything. And so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to map over my shelves. So here's a null check again. Do I have any shelves at all? As long as I do, then map over them to create as many bookshelves as I have shelves of. My key is going to be the name of each of those shelves and then the data for the shelf. So I'm not saying books, I'm not doing anything, I'm just saying this is a shelf and I'm passing it to this bookshelf object. So you can see my data is cascading down. I haven't passed down any additional functions or anything else because those components don't need the things that I've got up there at this point. They're just going to render data. That's all they're doing now is rendering data. So if you look at the bookshelf, it's now going to, it doesn't even have a state anymore. It's just going to read everything off the props. It's going to map, as long as I have my bookshelf or my books here, it's going to say, great, I've created a shelf. So look at the props. The props have a shelf. The shelf has books. Map each book in that list of books. And for each one of those, I'm going to create a book item. Pretty straightforward. The book itself then, and it does have an on-shelf chain. I should have taken this out. This doesn't actually do anything in this branch, so I should have left that off. If we look at the book then is going to take the data that's passed to it. It's looking for authors. It says that I'm doing a null check again. Are there any authors on this book? Because there are books in the data that don't have any authors on them. And if you don't null check it, you'll get an error. So as long as there are authors, it's not null, then I'm going to look at the books, or the props, the book, the authors. I'm going to do a join on those just for visual effect, because there might be more than one author, and that's going to be my author's string. I'm going to get the thumbnail art for the book cover, and getting that again, checking to make sure that the image links property of book is not null, because it can be. As long as it's not null, then I'm going to build out this URL, and I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to create, this also should have been taken out. This actually isn't used in any of this project. This is for like phase 3 in the React Nano degree. I'll create it's got the button for the cover, so I can click on it. That's, again, something else I was doing. Here's the book cover with the background image, and it's got the title, and it's got my authors that I created. And then the shelf changer still looks like it did before. It's not doing anything. So if I run this now, you'll see that I now have more books. I didn't change the shelf title. That was an error in this one, but we'll change it in the next commit. But you can see I've got 3 shelves, and all of the books are here, and I've got my authors, and I've got my cover and my title. So that's all it took to hook the data up. So stage 1, I broke down everything into components. Stage 2, I did a little bit of wiring up of the data into those components, and that's all it took to get everything working. Okay, I'll move on to stage 3. So this is the part that starts to get harder, and we'll talk about lifting state more. So this is where we can actually start switching shelves. So we'll go back up to the app, because remember, our master list of all of our books and all of our shelves is being maintained at the app level. Our state with our books is up here. So we're going to make sure that we have the change shelf function be up here, because this is ultimately the version of the list that needs to know about it. It needs to know about it all the way at the top of the application. So we want this change shelf function to be all the way at the top of our application tree. Maybe it could have gone in the bookcase if I rearranged things differently. Again, this is just how I chose to do it. Perhaps the bookcase could be the master holder of, or the holder of the master list of books. And then the change shelf could just be applied there, and app wouldn't need to know about it at all. But this is how I chose to do it in this version. So change shelf, the things that we're going to want the change shelf function to know are which book are we talking about and which shelf do we want it to move to. So those things will get passed in as arguments. The books API will be called with an update to say which book we're moving in which shelf. And when we get the response back, then we're going to create a new list of books. We're going to go through and filter everything to make sure that the book is already in the list. This is something that becomes more, this is something that really relates more to the final stage when we're adding books from the search page. We're making sure that the book, if the book is already on the shelf, then we just update it. Otherwise, we're pushing the new book into the shelves, we're resorting all the books, and then we're setting our state. This is the only function that's changing on this page. This is the only new thing we've added in this particular part of the program. What we are doing now, though, is we're adding some more to the bookcase. So we already had before books, and we had on refresh all books, and now we're creating, we're telling the child that it's got something to work with called on change shelf. And on change shelf is just referring to this change shelf that we have up here. So if we go down to bookcase, we go down to bookcase and we see what we're doing with everything from there. You can see all of our code that we had before is the same. Our functions are the same. We haven't changed anything about the bookcase at all, except now the bookcase is telling the bookshelves about this on-chain shelf function too. So it's not actually doing anything with it itself, but it has to pass it down to every level below it that's going to need to be aware of it. So again, this is part of what managing the state lifecycle is about. The books are being, the full list of books is being kept at app.js, which is also where our on-chain shelf function is. Every layer of components, every layer of children, of descendants that need to know about those things, they have to pass it down to the next level. So Bookcase isn't actually doing anything with it, but it's going to pass it down. Bookshelf is going to look at it, and it's doing the same thing. That's, oh, actually, yeah, it's doing, let me see here. Yeah, it's not doing anything with it either. And then book, well, did I mess something up? I'm sorry. Because this should have to know about it too. Nope, something doesn't seem to be right. Hang on a second. Nope, this says we're on switch shelves. It's odd. Because we should be seeing those functions being passed down here too. No, but there it moved. So, sorry, give me just a second to try and figure out why the display didn't refresh here. Yeah, there we go. So on-chain shelf is getting passed down to book, and then book is taking on-chain shelf as well as the book data itself. Now we're going to pass the data for this book and the on-chain shelf button down to the changer. And then the changer is where we're going to use these things. So now when I have a select, it's got an on-change event. And the on-change event is going to take the element that's being clicked, and it's going to say change the shelf, get the book, and the value from that shelf changer. So again, not a lot of changes. We added one function up at the very top level, passed it all the way down the tree so that it made it down to the changer, and then implemented that function. That's really the only thing that we've done here. But you can see that what that allows us to do now is I can click on the changer and it moves the book. And the reason we see it move the book is because we're calling that function that's all the way back up at the top in the app.js file. And that's doing a set state. And the set state kicks off the lifecycle management, which says my state has changed, this value for books has changed. Who needs to know about it? Who's using that value? Okay, well, the bookcase is using that value, so tell bookcase. Bookcase's state then says, okay, it changed. Who do I need to tell about it? And bookcase says bookshelf needs to know. Bookshelf does the same thing and says book needs to know. Book does the same thing and says the changer needs to know. And all of those layers along the way say, what about the value of this book has changed? And what does it mean to me? So bookshelf says, okay, I've got a new list of books. It's different than the one I had before, so I'm going to re-render my display. So this one re-renders, and this one re-renders. But what you'll never see or notice as a user is nothing happened to this one at all. Nothing changed, so nothing happened. All right, so then we'll go to the next stage. Which is stage 4 React Router. Okay. Okay, React Router is where we're going to go back and look at the app a little bit more. So what we've done here you're going to see we're importing some more files now, specifically our stuff for React Router. And on some other files, we're going to be importing link. Nothing on this is changing. All of this remains the same. Everything here is the same. Down here, we've changed our render function. Now we've got it split into 2 routes, one for the bookcase and one for search. On the bookcase now, we're still passing down books and on change shelf and on refresh all books. And then for route, we're passing down our selected books, which is the books on our shelf, or we're calling it selected books. We're telling search it's called selected books. The reason I'm calling it selected books is these are the books that are already chosen to be on shelves. They've already been selected. Here's that list. Search needs to know about that because when you're on the search page and you get a list of books back, you're going to need to mark which ones were already on which shelves. So nothing in the bookcase and below is changing at all in this step. At this point, all we're worried about is search. And so if we go and we look at search, and I don't know why it's not automatically refreshing. Not sure why it's not refreshing. Oh no, that's why. Sorry. This was strictly just doing the router. So we're not going to be showing anything here yet at all. But what we are going to have is we will now have the ability to click the button and it'll take us to the search and click this and it'll take us back. That's all we're doing in this step is putting in the router so that we can switch screens. So this will get us to our last step. And our last step is going to be to actually do all of the searching. So stage 5, search books. And here's the great thing about the search books. This and my utilities file are the only 2 files we're changing. The bookcase, the bookshelf, the book, the changer, absolutely nothing is changing anymore on those. Those components now all know how to do exactly what it is that they need to do. Unless we want to add a new feature, we're done with those. We'll never look at those again. We can, you know, if we were doing this in a production environment for an application that's going to be used by real people, we could say these are tested, they're certified, they're done. And when we test new functionality going forward, we don't have to actually look at those because we already know they're good and we haven't touched them. Search, on the other hand, we're going to do quite a bit too. So in search, we're going to create a function for change error query. This is actually, when we're typing into the entry field, and I'm setting up a timeout. This is also called a debounce, which is basically saying wait for 250 milliseconds while the person is typing. Basically give them a quarter second between keystrokes. If they take longer than that, then call this update search function. And this is where the search will actually go back to the server. In the update search function, we'll set the state so that we're keeping a hold of what they've typed in. We will clear out the list of books in the result. We'll do a search with the Books API, get our response, put everything into it, make sure that the query wasn't empty, throw an error if it is, check out the length. Here in the utilities folder, I've created a function called merge, shelf, and search, which we'll look at in a minute. Then we sort the books, then we set the state, because now we've got a list of books to display. Component will receive props, lets us know that this thing could get updated multiple times. And so each time it gets an update, then we're going to redo everything, remerge the shelf and the search and sort and set the state. And then we'll display our list of books in the search. A lot of this looks exactly like we have on the standard bookshelf. We're just displaying an ordered list of books. And it has all of the same functionality that we give to the book on a regular basis. Book data, on change shelf. Again, this on update quick view is for a later stage of my reads that I wrote in the React Nano degree. So I can still pass this, it's going to be a null. If we look at the merge, shelf, and search, this function is taking the books that are already on bookshelves, so the list that's up at our app.js file, and the books that have come back on our search results. And I'm going to make a hash table, and I'm going to iterate through the books, and I'm going to look for the books that are already on the shelf. And for anything that is not already on the shelf, I'm going to set its selection to none, and I'm going to return that list back. So what that lets me do is now I can come to the search, and I can type in a search, and I've got a list of books. They're alphabetized, and you can see this one says none because it's not on any shelves already. Oh, do I have any of them on there? Hang on a second. Let me look. Okay, let's put one on there. So I'll change this one to currently reading. And if I go back to here, it's on my list. And that's because I use the same functions that were already there and already working to add a book to a shelf or move a book on a shelf. So I didn't have to change any of that. It already existed. If I go back to this search again and do the same search, and you can see this book now will say it's currently being read because that data is already there. And I'm merging it together. At this point, project's done. Everything's finished. It'd be ready to turn in. We don't have any errors. We can have books without images. We can have books without authors. And everything is running clean. There aren't too many functions that you're going to write, but the thing to remember in React is to place those functions and that data at the appropriate level in the tree, and then pass them down to everyone who's going to need them so that they can then say, this is something I need to do. Basically, it's you've got your manager, which is your app.js file, and the app.js file is telling everyone else, hey, I need you to go and do some things. And there's, if you have a particular need, this one thing is something that only I can actually take care of. So here's how you can get a hold of me to tell me when you need me to take care of this thing. That thing happens to be switching the bookshelf for a given book. And so everyone has to know about it, and so they all pass the information along, and that lets them all call directly back to the manager. Now, some people have asked, boy, it seems like we go through an awful lot of steps to pass this information around in React. And you are 100% right. Those are a lot of steps to pass things around. What you don't get into in this particular project with the Fend degree is talking about Redux. And Redux is a much bigger topic. We're not going to cover it here at all. But it does set up a mechanism whereby instead of having to go all the way up and down this big chain of however many component layers of children there are, you can have a little bit more direct interaction with that data store, with that state. So, the application state would be called a data store, and you can have a little more direct interaction there in a way that still remains friendly for everybody. So that is what I have to walk through in terms of the project. At this point, I want to make sure that we talk about questions anyone has. So I see Susan posted a question for a quick confirmation of understanding. OnChange can be on any component, but the function that is called and associated data changes via setState should be at the app level. So yes, that's pretty much right. Wherever that function, wherever you write the function, wherever you place it in the tree is where it's going to get called back to. So for instance, if we put it on, say, the bookshelf instead of on the app level, and we pass the change shelf down to, down to the changer, and it sent that message up, it would only go to the bookshelf, and the bookshelf would say, change this data, but it wouldn't be in the context of all of the books, and so it wouldn't work. You know, it has to go all the way back up to who's holding the master list, and the bookshelf doesn't hold the master list. It just holds its own copy of a portion of the list for that one shelf. So that's how you have to think through who needs to ultimately know about what's happening, because that person owns and controls that piece of information, and they're then going to tell everyone else who needs to know about it. So that's really how that is being handled there. With that, let's open it up to questions anybody else has, anything you'd like to ask, or any problems you're running into with this or other React projects that maybe we can cover here. And I'll even unmute all the microphones if you guys want to talk instead of type. And we can cover anything that you might be having questions about regarding React. So talk a bit more about lifecycle events. Okay. So React lifecycle, if we go and we look at, where did I have that one? I think it was in search. So we have, let me get a couple up here. We've got the component will receive props. Component did mount. Yeah, I think those are the only two that I'm using here in this project are component did mount and component will receive props. And there are others too, but I'm not remembering them all off the top of my head. So you'll have to forgive me for not having everything top of mind. Component did mount is really the message that React sends or the components receive from the React runtime engine that says, okay, this component is fully up and ready. So you can do whatever you need to from here. It's kind of important because that's the place where if you need to make some assumptions about when data will be ready to manipulate, when things will be ready to, really take significant action on, component did mount is the function you want to work inside of, because that means React is ready for you to do whatever you want to with it. There are some precursor events that you can use to do certain things in. Honestly, I've not really worked with those much, haven't found much reason to. Component will receive props is another way of saying this thing will update, and when it does, I'll pass you the information. So, if we look at component did mount, it doesn't receive anything here. There are other lifecycle events where you'll get the first time instance of the props coming in. And so I was trying to look and see if I have any of those, and I don't. So there may be points where you only care about the very first time props are set for the object. You don't care about updates or anything else. All you care about is the first time that the props come through. And so there's a lifecycle event you can use for that. This one says anytime the props change, then I want to do something with those. And this is a really good thing to have. It can also be a bit of a double-edged sword in a larger application because, and especially when you start working with Redux too, because a prop change can cascade to places that you wouldn't think it would. And so you can still put in checks in here and say, well, if this prop value really doesn't have anything different than what I would expect, then don't do the render. And you can shortcut the render stage, which will improve your performance considerably. But for this project, these are really the only two lifecycle events that you're interested in. You can go to Facebook's React documentation and look at the other lifecycle events that are there and get more about them. And like I've covered a couple times, that coupled with where you place your functions in the hierarchy and where you're placing your data in the hierarchy, those are the things that seem to, they really trip people up the most frequently, because you think you've got it in the right spot, or, you're used to just working with data in one place because it has a more global context that you unconsciously rely on a lot of times. And here, that context makes a lot of difference. Pretty much nothing is global. Everything resides within a component, and that component, you tell it to pass it around as it needs to be passed around. There's not really anything at a global level that you're going to be working with here, so you have to be mindful of that. Okay, on change event in the search page. What could be wrong if the menu does change to read? You change it from read to want to read, but not current. I'm trying to follow the question. So if it changes from, I got you, okay. And I remember seeing your question before, Lou. So if you change the menu and it properly works, changing it from read, and it changes to want to read properly, but it doesn't change to currently reading properly. I'm going to be honest, odds are it's a typo. As silly as that sounds, odds are it's a typo somewhere with the value. Look at what the value is for currently reading that you're passing in, and what the expected values for displaying currently reading are. Make sure they match. Having an expectation, in a function that says look for a string currently reading, and if so, set it to that shelf, and having the wrong value come in, that can be the most annoying error in the world. I do recall looking at some of your code before where there was a typo that was doing something very similar to that. And so I would recommend looking for a typo. What other questions do we have? I've set all of your mics to be unmuted. If you want to talk, you don't have to. Are there any other topics you want to cover? I went through the project kind of fast, but once you know how it's structured, it actually can go kind of quickly. I was taking my old version of this project, told Kelsey I was going to set it up with this breakdown this way, and I thought it would take me a lot longer to put it together than it did. I was surprised how quickly it went. Especially now that I know how it goes together. Let's see. Can you access the props out of render? So absolutely. So if you look, here's my render function for the changer, and here is props. So I'm passing the value of the book for the changer. I'm calling the onChange shelf function, and I'm passing the book that's on the props that was passed to the changer as one of the parameters in that function call. You can 100% you can access it. Really great question though, because it gives me the opportunity to call out that while you can access it, and while technically JavaScript will let you directly manipulate it or mutate that stuff, what's in the props, you should not change anything that's in props or in state from inside the render function. That can have a lot of really negative repercussions. For instance, let's say that I change the value of something. I change the list of books, or I change a property of a book from inside the return function on the props. What that's going to do is propagate all the way back up to the place that comes from, however high up in the tree that is, and that's potentially going to cause a cascade of things coming back down. And so that could cause this render cycle to go into an infinite loop where I'm changing and changing, and it's causing re-renders and re-renders. So don't manipulate state or manipulate props inside of the render function. Do access them, just don't manipulate them.
Doug,
Uh, see,
Doug, yeah,
yeah,
this is me, it's Sam, Samir. I go by Sam. But the thing is, like, I was working on the project yesterday, and sometimes I'm passing a prop to, let's say, from app to bookcase, right? And I wanted to access that prop from the outside of the render method on bookcase, and I can't. It says it's undefined. You can only pass. That's the problem. You shouldn't like manipulate things inside the render, but you can only pass data from one file to another, one component to another through the render method.
correct. That's correct. So just like here, where the bookshelf is mapping through the books and it's creating these books, and so I'm taking the props shelf books, so this list of books, and I'm mapping over it, and here's the book object, and I'm passing that book object to the book component. So here it is.
Oh, that's why you have to keep your functions in one place, right? Because, for example, if I could pass the books list all the way to the book, which is the last component,
Mm-hmm.
I could create my function there. It took me so long to figure that out. I'm like, how
You
am I?
can do that. You can do that. Yeah, technically speaking, yes, you could do that.
Well, but
In terms of code structure, though, you shouldn't do that. Technically, it's possible, but now what you're doing in doing that, remember, it's a principle of make sure each component does only what it needs to be responsible for. So if you think about if you're to suddenly make books sentient life forms and put them on bookcases, does each book need to have the capability of being in charge of organizing all of the other books on the shelf? Or does the owner of the bookcase just need the capacity to organize all the books on the shelf? That's really the way to look at this. As the human being in the room with the bookcase sitting beside me in my office here, I'm the one who needs to have the capacity and ability to reorganize all of those books on the shelves the way I want them to. Each of those books doesn't need to have that kind of intelligence built into it. It doesn't even need to know what other books are in my library. All it needs to know is the information about itself and anything that it might do with that information, which it's a book. It's dumb. It doesn't actually do anything with it other than show me its cover and tell me who its authors are. So that's the way to think about structuring your code. Technically, yes, you could push those functions and the master list all the way down to every book. That's going to start to consume a lot of memory from a technical perspective. But the other end of it is, it's just not the way you probably should think about how components get organized. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Are you listening? Yes, it makes sense.
Okay, great, awesome. Glad I was able to help with that one. Let's see here. I'm going to go back through a couple questions that have been typed in. So on change on top of app.js versus the lower area on app.js. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure I'm following that question. Can I explain the on change on top of app.js versus the lower area on app.js? Can you, Lou, can you maybe clarify that question a little for me? I would be happy to answer it. I'm just not quite following it yet. Can you have more than one on change in a component? Or can on change drive two functions? Ooh, that's an interesting question. So again, technically speaking, the answer to this can be yes. The question I would ask in return, though, is how would you see that working? Because that would be more like, that would be kind of like, again, let's think about a distributed team. you've got a manager who is in Chicago, and you've got 3 employees who work in different time zones. One is in the Ukraine, and one is in Texas, and one is in India, for instance. And the the person in Texas has some information that they need to pass off to the person in the Ukraine and the person in India, so that they each know about, something that they need to do with this piece of information. And so the question is, would it make more sense to send messages to each of those other 2 people individually, which would be the equivalent of calling 2 functions, or would it make more sense to tell the manager in Chicago about what those people need to know about, so that the manager can distribute that information as the manager sees fit? Because maybe only the person in Ukraine needs to know, or maybe both of them need to know. That's kind of the tack that React takes with these things. So technically, yes, you could have multiple functions being caused by onChange, but, practically speaking, really not the way that React thinks about the world. If you have a function, either it's going to do something within the component itself. And I suppose this is where you could have 2 things happen. It does something within the component itself, plus it messages back up to the, it messages back onto the parent. That's usually how you're going to look at it, because it's going to be pretty rare. I mean, a component only comes from one ancestor in this case. And so any functions that the component might need to know about are going to be passed down by that ancestor. So the ancestor is probably not going to tell it, 2 things that are related that have to happen at the same time. It would instead say, hey, here's this one thing that would happen for this event. Let's see, Ramona says, not on the project yet, just downloaded it last night. When I downloaded, it does not look like yours. You are right, it does not. I didn't show stage 0. So stage 0 is take the code that you get from downloading the repo. And then stage 1 is what it looks like when I break it down into all of these parts. So yes, I created all these different JS files. I took app.js, and I started carving out the bookcase and the bookshelf and the book from all of the code that's inside there. So it's just like a Russian nesting doll. Take app.js and take all of the guts out of it and turn that into a bookcase component. And then take the guts out of bookcase and turn it into a bookshelf. And just down and down the line until I've gone as far as I want to go. But like I said, that's the way I approached it. It could be, different people. Like when I went through the React Nano degree, I had my entire team at work go through it at the same time. So I was doing it with my team. And as we got past each of the project milestones, we would get together and do and do a bit of a debrief and share what we had turned in and what we had learned along the way. And while there were parts of what we did that looked similar, there were 4 of us, and all of our stuff looked different. Our designs looked different. Our code structures looked different. There were a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences too. So there's no one right way to do it all. There are just good principles to follow. Let's see. Could I put 2 functionalities that you want to achieve inside the same function? Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, you can absolutely do that. This is where, if you have a parent object and it's going to tell a child, basically, that your child is going to handle an on-click event. And the on-click event is going to message back up to the parent. Well, once the parent receives that on-click event, if it's got 2 functions inside of itself that it wants to run, then yeah, you can create another function that just says, hey, here's what you're going to do for on-click. I'll worry about what to do with it when you tell me it happens. And then it can fire off these other 2 functions that it has for stuff it wants to do. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely the way to do things.
Doug?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wrote that because the question, like that Susan had, like if you could have more than one onChange in a component, and I said that like you can just put the two functions that you want to have the same function, right?
Yeah. Like I was saying, the parent, basically what passing these things down the chain does is, the bookshelf is giving, or, the bookshelf is, or the bookcase is saying, well, actually, let me go all the way back up to app. App is just saying, hey, just tell me when you're moving a book, which book you're moving, and what book you're moving, right? That's all it's saying. Tell me which book you're moving and what shelf you're moving it to. You don't have to worry about anything else. You just need to tell me those things. And then you look at what that change shelf is doing. Well, it's, calling the API, and it's updating the bookshelf, and it's handling stuff with the response, and, then it's making a call out to, it's pushing stuff into the list if it needs to. It's calling the sort on the books to resort the list. It's setting the state. It could call some other functions if it needed to. This is all stuff that the application cares about. The book doesn't need to know any of that stuff. It just needs to know how to tell this function when something's happening. This function cares about what all of the mechanics are beyond that. This is just, when you do this event, this is what you're going to trigger. You're going to send me back something, and I'm going to do stuff with it. And that's the way to look at it. Every component, I can't stress enough, every component only needs to be good at its specific job. The shelf changer, all the shelf changer is good at is displaying the little drop-down list and firing off the event that says, hey, I got changed. That's all it knows how to do. And it's really good at that. And it doesn't need to know how to do anything else because that's its job. All it knows is, hey, I've got somebody that I'm going to tell that I moved this book to this shelf, that event happened. And after that, it's hands off and it doesn't care. So that's the way to think of the world in React. Every component, and it may do a couple of things, small things like this, but it's all related to its core job. And if you find that you're building a component that's doing a lot of things, well, you probably really need to break it down into multiple components then. It's probably not just one component. It's probably a few or multiple. And so you start thinking about, okay, how am I going to break that down further? I've seen the question asked in the past when I was doing the React Nano degree, is it possible to break down your components too far? And the answer to that is almost always no. Like I said, you look at this shelf changer, it's just a select. That's all it does. And if we were writing our own custom select, well, we'd probably break it down into, a div that's a box and another div that displays the list, and then break that, that to a list item, and just a standard select control. We're stopping here because that's given to us for free in the HTML engine. But if we had to write our own, we'd break it down into 3 or 4 more components. So no, it's really hard to say I've gone too far in breaking things down. This feels like a pretty comfortable level to break things down for this project. But I can't see how I would break it down any further, honestly. So let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, on change. How does it work with book API statements in app component div mount? On change and return function. Okay, so if we look in app, so the books API. Books API, I'm calling, actually let's start with refreshing the books. Refreshing the books is really just loading the books onto the shelves. So here I am calling books API, I'm calling get all. And once I get the response back, because this is a promise, my .then says take the list of books that I'm given, and I'm going to do a set state. And the set state is setting the value of books to the result of calling my books utils sort all books function on the list. So that's how that works here. The onChange is going to call this change shelf function. It's passing it the book object as a parameter and the new shelf as a parameter. And it is calling the books API, firing off the update event in books API, again, passing the book and the shelf as parameters, so the same data already passed in. Designed that way on purpose. My dot then takes the response. I'm not actually doing anything with the response, but the response lets me know that the operation is completed. And so I'm going to create a new list. The new list is a copy of this state books. And by doing slice, what I'm doing is making a literal copy, not just a second memory reference to it. This is and I'm sure you've already gone through it, but this is the trick where objects and arrays are passed by reference instead of by value. And if I want an actual duplicate instead of just a second reference to it, I need to do a slice 0 to get a duplicate of this array. So here I've got a completely separate copy of the list. I'm going to create a new books, which takes that new list and filters it. Each of the books inside that list, I'm checking the ID to see if it equals the ID of this book that's being affected. So what I'm going to come out with is a list of length 1, because that will be the only book that matches. So if the length is a positive or something other than 0, then I'm going to look at the first book, which will be the only book in that list. I'm going to update the shelf to this new shelf value that I've passed in. Otherwise, this is a book that doesn't exist on the shelf yet, or in the list yet. And so I'm going to take my new list. I'm going to put the new book into the list. I'm going to sort this whole list again, right? And then once I'm all done with everything, I've either updated the book that was already there, or I've pushed the new book onto the list. I'm going to set my state again, and my books is going to be my new list. So that duplicate that I made up front is now going to become the master list. I will admit this one took me a little bit to figure out when I first wrote it. It's not too many lines of code when you're done with it, but it can get a little tricky thinking it through. Let's see. So we're actually a couple minutes past time. I don't mind going a couple more if you guys have some other questions. Otherwise, we'll be done, and this video will be available for you to go back and look at. I'll get the information to Kelsey, and she'll get it posted up. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you inviting me or letting me come in and invade the Fen space a little bit from the MWS world. If you do have any questions, feel free to ping me. I'll put it on the screen here for a moment just to make sure everybody's able to see it. My repo is available. Feel free to go and take a look at it. Feel free to, check everything out. Hopefully having it in these branches helps so that you can see how the project can progress and break down into some simpler steps. And everybody have a great day. You've still got, the extension's awesome, so you've all got a few weeks more to get through the degree, and you'll totally be able to do it. All right, have a great weekend.